Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Science of Happiness. My name is Maggie Ray, and I'm going to explore yogic and Western perspectives on the science of happiness today. So let's get started. So today, I'm going to talk about first what factors science claim are the most effective ways of cultivating happiness in terms of bio, psycho, and social measures. Then we'll review what yoga philosophy says about experiencing happiness from physical, energetic, cognitive, ethical, relational, and spiritual perspectives. Finally, we will move, breathe, and meditate in yogic ways that promote the experience of happiness or endless joy that we call ananda in yoga. So first of all, let's look at what Western perspectives are on the science of happiness. How is it defined? What is happiness? What factors make us happy? What do these factors from the science of happiness have in common with yoga philosophy? And finally, what is missing from the science of happiness according to yoga philosophy? What are future directions to this research? So the science of happiness was a term that was coined in the 1980s by a Hungarian-American psychologist. And it's become a subset of positive psychology developed by Martin Seligman. And you can read about that in his book called Authentic Happiness from 2002. So how is happiness defined by Western science? Well, there's two kinds of happiness that are talked about in the literature, and both of them come from ancient Western Greek philosophy. So first, the literature talks about hedonistic happiness, and this comes from Epicurus, his Ethics. And in his Ethics, he talks about a life of pleasure, acting for the sake of enjoying pleasure. Then Aristotle comes along in his Ethics, and he talks about eudaimonic happiness, eudaimonia, which means happiness or human flourishing from the Greek. And this is a steadfast, virtuous, ethical, and wise action, and it's done for the sake of itself, not for another outcome. And it is achieved through philosophical, intellectual, as well as moral and political contemplation of what is virtuous and right, ethical action. And this kind of living and doing in the world leads to well-being and human flourishing. And from Aristotle's eudaimonic happiness ideas, has come in positive psychology a questionnaire for measuring eudaimonic well-being. And it looks at 6 dimensions of eudaimonia: self-discovery, perceived development of one's best potentials, a sense of purpose and meaning in life, investment of significant effort in pursuit of excellence, intense involvement in activities and enjoyment of activities as personally expressive. So what factors make us happy according to the science of happiness? So we're going to look at 2 lists that incorporate hedonistic as well as eudaimonic happiness. They also include relational ideas of happiness, often called social support. We're going to look at two lists. The first one is with John Helliwell from UBC through his World Happiness Reports, and they are in their 8th edition now. And then we're going to look at Dan Buettner's 9 factors that are based on his blue zones of happiness. So first of all, looking at John Helliwell's six factors of subjective well-being. So the first factor, he's an economist, and the first factor is income. So it is often said that money can't buy happiness, but it helps. And it can help you and your community create a foundation for deeper levels of happiness. Life expectancy is also important. If you don't have a long life with a high quality, you don't have the opportunity to experience happiness. Social support is key, especially having someone that you can count on when things don't go well in your life. Generosity, charity, giving money to others. I would suggest giving your time to others, though I'm not sure Helliwell looked at that piece. Public trust, trusting your government and your community, that it is free of corruption, that it's safe, trustworthy, really important. And finally, maybe the most important, according to Helliwell, is freedom. And that's the freedom to make key life choices to direct your life. Let's look at Dan Buettner's 9 happiness factors. So he first looks at community. And from community, you achieve wellness, social engagement, and you also have access to healthy foods and food security. The environment you're in is key. Your home environment, your workplace, your social network. So physical, but also social environments. How much sleep you get. Sleep hygiene, it's often called. 6 to 8 hours a night seems to be the optimum for most people. And purpose, being on purpose, having goals, priorities, and feeling that you're making progress towards those goals. Movement becoming a very important topic. The new smoking is sitting, so movement promotes happiness, exercise, any kind of movement. Friendliness, likability, practicing likability, getting along with others. Hobbies, doing something that you really love, even if you don't make money at it. And it's not about the outcome, it's about the process of what you're doing. Having at least 3 close friends that you can really count on for social support. And finally, the act of loving someone deeply. So as a yogi, when I started studying the science of happiness around 2005, after reading a Time magazine article on the topic, I noticed that there were some factors missing. I continued to study the science of happiness up until the present, and still I have found that there's at least one important factor missing from a yoga perspective. And I wanted to explore that more, so I had a look at the yoga philosophy, and we're going to delve into that a little bit to see what I found. So in a general way, we can say that all of these happiness factors are measuring bio, psychosocial, economic, ethical factors that definitely influence our experience of both hedonistic happiness, the everyday, pleasurable happiness of life, and eudaimonic happiness, that deeper level of happiness to do with pursuing your goals and living ethically and virtuously. Hedonistic happiness in yoga is called sukham. And the sukham means pleasure, and it's considered a limited pleasure, not a lasting happiness. And this sukham that does not last, unfortunately, often becomes its opposite, which is a word called dukkham, suffering or pain. So when we look at Seligman's exploration of eudaimonic happiness from positive psychology, he definitely takes us deeper than hedonistic happiness. And he points out the importance of healthy relationships as well. So he moves us from hedonistic to eudaimonic happiness, living ethically. And he also points out the importance of relationship, which I'm going to also suggest is deeper than even eudaimonia. And you see all of this reflected in Helliwell and Buettner's happiness factors that we looked at earlier. So these models and factors, in particular Helliwell and Buettner's, as well as positive psychology, they are supported by the yoga tradition, what we've seen thus far. But according to yoga, they still are not the ultimate authentic happiness as defined by yoga. So according to yoga, we have to go deeper still, beyond the body, the breath, and the mind, to a spiritual happiness called ananda, or endless joy happiness, a lasting happiness. And this authentic, lasting happiness, ananda, is talked about in the ancient yoga tradition, which is 5,000 to 10,000 years old. We're not sure because it was an oral tradition many years before it started being written down. And in the ancient Vedas of India, one of the Vedas from the Taittiriya Upanishad, the later texts of each of the four Vedas. This is from the Yajurveda. So there's this model from Brigavali, which has become very important in yoga therapy as an integrative health model, to look at 5 layers of the human existence. And these 5 layers are called mayas. And from the Vedas, it talks about contemplating these 5 layers to understand they are all coming from Brahman. And Brahman is a state, a loka, a reality, a consciousness that is eternally happy. And in the previous chapter, as often is the case in the yogic texts, the goal is defined before the practice of getting there. And the goal is defined as seeking, realizing Brahman, this state. And in the state of Brahman, this happiness that you will achieve or experience, ananda, it's actually said, which is very typical in the Vedas, gives it a number. It's said that it's 10 to the power of 20 times more happiness than you even experience in your youth. So that points to this happiness being beyond the hedonistic happiness of pleasure. So that's a lot of happiness. And it is a happiness that is beyond the changing nature of sukham or pleasure. So let's have a look at these 5 layers. The first one is annamaya, and anna means food, and this food becomes our body, and we move and exercise our body, and this is related to the physical practices of yoga called asana. Then there's pranamaya, life force or prana, and this prana, this energy, animates our body. It pervades everywhere. And we use our breathing exercises of yoga, pranayama, to activate this life force within us. Manomaya, cognition, the manas, the mind. We want to master the mind and its 5 senses through education, through educating the mind, so that we can become wise and purposeful, and develop the mental concentration and mindfulness to be able to experience deeper states. And this ability to master the senses is called Pratyahara, which we'll look at later. And dharana is that mental concentration, that ability to pick a direction and go for it. Next, we have vijnanamaya, and vijnana means discernment, discerning through self-reflection, how to live in alignment with our values and ethics. So contemplating right action, virtuous behavior based on our value system, core values, ethical framework. And yoga is clear, it's not about having a particular value system, but whatever your value system is, to live by it. That is what is important. So this is cross-cultural as well. We're challenging personal perspectives based on our past experiences, possibly past lives and tendencies from those lives, our personality, and our preferences. So we're challenging all of this through this self-reflection. And we're doing this in order to live a purposeful, virtuous life. Based on what this self-reflection, contemplation tells us is ethical, virtuous action. And this is related to dhyana, meditation, the ability to contemplate, and also appropriate action, Kriya Yoga, how to make any action into yoga. And we're going to look more at these practices next. Finally, Anandamaya, the deepest layer of the human system, according to the Brihabali from the Taittiriya Upanishad, is all about our relationships. And these are relationships that promote ananda, endless joy or happiness. And from a yoga perspective, these relationships are with the self, others, and spirit. So our relationship to our little self, our everyday self, our ego, you could say, is linked also to our feelings, our moods, our emotions. I feel this way today, that way. This is at this layer of ananda. It's also our relationship with others, our friends, our family, and community. So we all know that our relationships promote joy, and sometimes they give us the opposite, suffering, dukkha. And a deeper relationship is called for. And this deeper relationship is with the changeless spirit. You can look at that as something outside of yourself or something within you that is eternal and changeless. So yoga allows for both of those perspectives. And this is called Brahman, this pure consciousness. And this is the highest goal of yoga, the self-realization or actualization called samadhi. And when we foster the opposite, unhealthy relationships with ourself, others, or spirit, the eternal, we experience dukkha. We experience the opposite of ananda, joy, bliss, happiness, called dukkha, suffering. So next we're going to look at happiness according to the most important text of yoga called the Yoga Sutras, written by the sage Patanjali, about 500 BCE. And like the Greek philosophers, yoga, in the Yoga Sutras, asserts that happiness is our natural, inherent state of being. And when we move away from this natural state, it's due to external factors from our everyday worldly life. They take us away from our essence of happiness. Through the practice of the 8 limbs of yoga, so yoga is not just the asana or the postures, it's much more. So practicing these 8 limbs, which we'll look at in a minute, will reduce these factors that cause suffering, dukkha. And through these practices, we'll uncover our natural inner light that brings us to jnana, or self-knowledge. This is a lasting state, ultimately. In the beginning, you move in and out of the experience of samadhi, but ultimately, it's a lasting state of enlightenment. And in this lasting state, you experience the real deal, authentic happiness called ananda. And the Sutras says that the wise know that if you solely seek happiness in worldly pleasures, or what we call hedonism or sukham, this ultimately leads to its opposite, which is suffering or dukkha. So let's have a look at the 8 limbs of yoga, these practices that are supposed to promote happiness and lessen suffering. So the first one, the foundation, is the ethics, the relationship with others, having an ethical, trustworthy community. And this reminds me of Helliwell's factor about having a trustworthy community as an important factor in promoting happiness. It also reminds me of eudaimonia, living ethically. Niyama is the yogic lifestyle. So how we relate with ourself, our little self, in terms of our self-care, including cleanliness, contentment, disciplined behavior, self-reflection, and our relationship with the source of all, spirit, God, divine, however you want to define that. Yoga is not particular on that point. And you can even be an atheist and still be a yogi. So whatever is highest for you. And the asanas, the postures or the shapes, these postures teach us how to be asa, how to be present, through balancing softness, sukham, with strength, stiram. And through this process, we cultivate infinite harmony, ananta, not ananda, but ananta, in the face of opposition through relaxed attention. And this reminds me a lot of Taoism, the yin and the yang, and the harmony that comes from balancing those opposites. Pranayama. So this is all to do with prana, the life force, lengthening the breath through breathing techniques, and finally going even beyond the techniques to a state of breath awareness. It also is talking about the freeing of the inner resources of prana or energy that are said to lie deep within our heart. The next limb, Pratyahara, this has to do with withdrawing from what the five senses seek. And we often do this through practices like fasting. Lots of talk about intermittent fasting these days. As a yogi, and I think all spiritual traditions that I've studied cross-culturally have fasting practices. And they're all about ultimately mastering the senses so that the mind can direct the senses towards what it wants. And through this practice of mastering the senses, having the senses work in our service rather than against us, we find a mean between extremes, as Aristotle says in Greek philosophy, in all earthly pleasures, including food, work, sleep, etc. And the Bhagavad Gita from chapter 617 says something similar in a beautiful way. It says, for one who skillfully regulates his lifestyle habits, including eating, working, exercising, relaxing, sleeping, and waking, suffering will be destroyed through the practice of yoga. So the lifestyle, the yogic lifestyle, is very stressed in the sutras themselves, the 8 limbs, the Yama and the Niyama, the relationship to others, your ethics, and your self-care, your relationship to yourself are the foundation of the other practices that are both seen and unseen. Dharana. So moving deeper still towards the ability to focus the mind, and through this concentration, develop mindfulness, and also with this ability being able to create a purpose and goal for your life. So being able to pick your direction. And dhyana is being able to fulfill, become absorbed in this goal that you've picked. And in some cases, it will be an object of meditation, like the sun, or it might be a god or a goddess, or it could be a mountain or a tree. It also could be an idea that you contemplate, a Yoga Sutra, a sacred text, or it can also be contemplating an experience. So becoming absorbed in that which you have decided to focus your mind on. And when the absorption deepens, it's called samadhi. And there's different levels of samadhi from the Yoga Sutras that we are said to experience. In the earlier stages, we're moving in and out of this state of absorption. But eventually we merge into the changeless self that we've talked about earlier, that part of you that knows, that sees, and that is said to not change. And in this state of yoga, this ultimate yoga, this union with the self, we experience immeasurable peace and go beyond the change to the changeless, as if you no longer exist. So having looked at the Yoga Sutras and trying to link them to the science of happiness, it seems to me that there are 4 different routes to experiencing hedonistic, eudaimonic, and what I'm calling spiritual happiness through the body, the breath, the mind, and the spirit. So I'm going to take you through that exploration. So first of all, the body. The body is our bedrock of stability with flexibility. So we use the body in yoga through the asanas, the physical practices, to cultivate strength, stiram, with softness, pleasure, sukham, becoming absorbed in an infinite state of harmony through the use of efficient effort. And in this state, we're no longer triggered by opposites. And this is physically and mentally. So I've never seen a body without a mind and a mind without a body. So there's a continuum of the body, breath, and mind. Patanjali discusses sukham, pleasure, or what's called hedonism in the Greek philosophy, as a resource for building ananta, this infinite harmony, this great resilience, when balanced with stiram, stability, attention, strength. So he doesn't allow for sukham on its own. It needs to be tempered, and I use that word very carefully, tempered with discipline, stiram. So sukham alone, too much ease. Stiram alone, too much strength. You need the balance of the hard and the soft. To create this moderation. So this reminds me of Epicurus in the Greeks, who promoted moderation, balance, harmony, and mentally, of course, equanimity, ananta, and upeksha, sometimes called in yoga as well, and resilience. Looking at the breath as the energizer, we use the breath to relax the mind and body through lengthening the exhale in particular. And for those of you who have studied lots on the relaxation response and the parasympathetic nervous system, you know science supports this very much. And yoga says that through the breathing exercises of yoga, pranayama techniques, we remove the dukkham, or the darkness, the suffering, the darkness, the smoky clouds from our inner light. And we experience happiness. And the mind, the concentrator, the ability to focus the mind, the chitta, to awaken the soul as the authentic director of each of us. So this is the definition of yoga, is the ability to focus the activities of the mind in one direction. And in such a state, it is said that we wake up. However, it goes on to say in the first 4 to 6 sutras of the first chapter, it goes on to say that the mind cannot give us lasting happiness. So in the 5th sutra, it says the mind can at best give us pleasure and at worst give us pain, dukkha. And it's oscillating between pleasure and pain. And still deeper, we're going to come to a state of equanimity. So this is actually the best. So the mind will oscillate between sukham and dukkham, pleasure and pain at worst. And at best, we will become absorbed in this infinite harmony and will experience upeksha, equanimity. So that's the befriended mind. When the mind is our enemy, it's just going back and forth between pleasure and pain. And we obviously want to create eudaimonic happiness through appropriate action. And yoga talks about this appropriate action as called Kriya Yoga. And this is from the second chapter of the Yoga Sutras, the first sutra. And Kriya Yoga, it's a sutra I wish that more people talked about because it's not usually discussed. Kriya Yoga is very important because it tells us how to make any action into yoga. And it's achieved by when you want to do something, so you want to do X, Y, and Z, and this Kriya Yoga is achieved by first deciding how best to go about that, what you want to do. So you have to do some swadhyaya or contemplation, picking your best course of action. And then once you've figured that out, what you want to do, then you go for it and you give it your all with great discipline, tapas, heat. And finally, you accept the results of your action with equanimity, surrendering to what is, accepting the fruits of your action. And for those of you who know the Bhagavad Gita, this is definitely pointing also to karma yoga, how to make any action into a yogic one. Like Aristotle, Patanjali is focusing on this kind of eudaimonic happiness as an active process. It is not just a state of being, but it's a way of being in the world. And this deeper level of happiness through the spirit, the seer, the knower, the experiencer deep within us. You can also think of it as existing outside of yourself as a divine entity. You can use the body, breath, and mind in service of the spirit to go beyond them. So it's very interesting. We use the body, breath, mind continuum to experience something beyond their changeable nature. And we use them to actually awaken. And we're awakening to who we really are, which is this soul, this drashta, this awakened spirit or soul that shines like the sun and enlightens the whole system. One of my favorite sutras, chapter 1-3. And in this state, the soul becomes established as the master of the system. So the soul takes its rightful place in the system and is no longer living by the dictates of the usurper, the mind, body. The body, breath, and mind are then in service of the soul as tools for spiritual flourishing and transformation. So we're going to do a summary now of the Panchamayas, or the 5 Mayas, the 5 layers of existence from the Brihavali, the Taittiriya Upanishad. And I'm going to link those to the factors of happiness and positive psychology that we looked at earlier. So Annamaya is the physical quality of our life. Anna meaning food. Food becomes body. And this is our physical environment. So important for a happy, good life. Our physical health. It's our foundation. Time spent moving and exercising this body. And the food that we make our body with. And the quantity of that food and the quality. And our ability to maximize the physical quality of our life will affect, or could affect, our ability to work, play, and socialize. It may also affect our experience of hedonistic happiness, pleasure, tempered with eudaimonic happiness, discipline. Pranamaya, the energetic layer or quality of our life. Our energy levels, our vibrancy, our vitality, our physiological health of our various systems, and the quality and quality of our sleep. So that aspect is talked about in the happiness factors about sleep. Energy levels aren't talked about so much, and I think they should be, because I think that's a pretty key piece for happiness, how much energy you have. Again, your energy levels affected by so many things, including sleep and the health of our physiology, affect our ability to work, play, and socialize. And this may affect our experience of hedonistic happiness, tempered with eudaimonic happiness. Manomaya, the cognitive quality of our life, manas, mind. Our educational levels, our aptitude to learn, adapt, understand. So primarily about our ability to learn and understand the world. Our ability to focus also on fulfilling our goals. So how to concentrate the mind in a direction. And our ability to do this will affect probably our financial and social status. Education levels certainly do that, but also our ability to follow through on goals. Sometimes we don't have the educational level that gives us opportunity, but our drive and concentration bring us to great heights, socially and financially. And of course, this may affect our experience of hedonistic and eudaimonic happiness. The Jnanamaya, the ethical quality of life, our capacity to be self-reflective, swadhyaya, meditating the self, meditating within, self-meditation, contemplation, our ability to act virtuously and ethically in alignment with our core values, and the ability to determine our goals based on our values. Our capacity to create a meaningful, purpose-driven life, as well as self-determination, efficacy, agency, all of this talked about in the literature about eudaimonia. And this is in yoga also talked about as stiram, strength, stable mind, and kriya yoga, how to make any action into a yogic one. And finally, the relational quality of life, our ability to strongly connect with the little self, others, and the big self, the source of all. To care, trust, and love for oneself and others, close friends, family, community, without being self-absorbed. And I would say also caring for those who are not from your own community, but from other communities. And I think Helliwell's factor of generosity points to this. So caring about others that you don't even know. This may impact our ability to experience emotional fulfillment at deeper layers of lasting peace, joy, and emotional freedom that I'm calling spiritual happiness. And the science of happiness does explore relationships, which definitely touches on the Ananda Maya level, the relational quality of life. But it only explores relationships with others not with self and the little self, or with the big self, or with the source of all. It's said in the yoga tradition that transformations made at this deepest layer, this ananda, joy layer of authentic happiness. It's said that transformations made at this deepest of the 5 panchamayas or layers are said to affect the whole system, the whole integrated system, even more profoundly than those transformations made at more superficial, physical, energetic, cognitive, or even ethical layers. The deeper the layer, the deeper the effect on the whole system. So any change you make to any of these layers will affect your whole system. It's an integrated system. But the deeper the layer, the faster and more transformative the change will be. So let's now summarize our exploration of the science of happiness from both Eastern and Western perspectives. So first of all, we looked at yoga as encouraging sukham or hedonistic happiness, but it has to be balanced with sthiram, eudaimonic happiness. And when you study science of happiness research, you will find that there's more and more talk about balancing hedonistic and eudaimonic happiness and measuring both of those. So some researchers are talking about creating a scale that incorporates all those aspects of happiness. So this is a balance of bio and psycho levels, so physical and psychological levels, which in yoga, in the Panchamaya system, are called Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya. So the body, physicality, the energy, breath, and the mind, cognition. Yoga also encourages eudaimonia all by itself, as does happiness research, especially positive psychology, through Martin Seligman. And this is called vijnana, or the ability to discern what our values are. And this ability leads to eudaimonic happiness, which is through our ability to be ethical. And there's lots of beautiful adjectives here related to that. Accountable, consistent, personal growth, ethical teamwork, integrity, trust, that trustworthiness that Helliwell talked about in society, achievement, achieving your goals, having faith, trust, openness, a life-work balance, pursuing excellence, and being accountable, participating in your community, and success, and ultimately, yoga says, the ability to live by your values. Yoga, like the science of happiness, encourages ananda, relationship with others, through meaningful relationships with friends, family, community, for social support, or as Helliwell says, to be able to really count on others when times are rough. Or Buettner talks about having at least 3 close friends and loving at least one other person deeply. So yoga and science agree on this. However, as a yogi, there's something more. And I would like to encourage my scientific friends to consider how the science of happiness could explore the deepest level of ananda, this 5th layer of happiness, beyond just the relationship with others, to include the relationship with the self, and ultimately the authentic, deep self called soul or spirit, to attain an authentic, lasting happiness that I'm calling spiritual happiness, which is the ultimate promise of yoga. So thank you very much for this opportunity to present at the Infinite Gathering Integrative Health and Mindfulness Virtual Conference. And I'd like to end with a mantra written by TKV Desagachar that is a summary of some of what I've been teaching today from the Vedas and the Sutras. Atma Hridaye Hridayamayi Aham Amrite Amritam Anandam Atma Hridaye Hridayamayi Aham Amrite Amritam Anandam. My soul is my heart, is my deepest heart. I am eternal, eternal bliss and joy. My soul is my heart, is my deepest heart. I am eternal, eternal bliss and joy. Amritam Anandam, eternal bliss and joy. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om. Thank you very much. I'm Maggie Ray, and I'm the director of Yoga Therapy International. And I'd also like to pay tribute to my teacher, D.V. Sridhar from Chennai, India. And he went through this lecture and he offered invaluable feedback and contributed to this offering. So thank you, Mr. Sridhar, for that. And he has a new translation of the Yoga Sutras that's coming out on Amazon. So I hope you can get hold of that to learn more about the real meaning of yoga. I've also got some links here on the science of happiness that you can have a look at in your time. And there is a publication that I hope you can find by my colleague Marlisa Sullivan, who also is very interested in this topic and has worked very hard on creating a philosophical and ethical foundation for yoga therapy through these kinds of explorations. So we're going to end with that today, and I hope you have enjoyed this and that you'll enjoy the yoga practice that follows, where we'll experience these principles in action in our body, breath, and mind, and beyond. Thank you. Namaste. Namaskaram.